say to you after the Senate hearing. We'd love to hear that.
Well, please call me Andreas, first of all. Yeah, the Senate hearing was rather exciting. I can tell you that was my first time in that kind of environment, and I was quite nervous at first with the specific audience, and I spent several days beforehand trying to decide if I was going to wear a suit. Now, I know that sounds like a rather trivial consideration, but I haven't actually worn a suit in 3 years. Ever since I stopped working for consulting with banks and started doing my own thing, I stopped wearing suits, and that served me pretty well. So one of my main concerns was, should I wear a suit? So I went for the compromise solution. As you'll see in the Senate video, I was wearing a tie, but that tie had a pattern on the front in binary, and that binary message was an ASCII message that spelled "ties suck." So that was my compromise. I wore a tie for the Senate, but the tie said "ties suck" in binary on it. And then I used that to break the ice. So when the senators came in, I said, I wore a tie for the first time in 3 years, but just so you know, my tie says "ties suck" on it. And they found that quite amusing. I didn't want them to think it was like a secret message or something like that to my followers. They don't sell ties that say things like Veritas in Numeris or to the moon or anything like that. So I just went with something simple. So it was kind of interesting because I didn't know what to expect. But when I first went into the room and as the senators started arriving, they were all extremely friendly. They told me that they were really looking forward to the presentation and had been reading the opening remarks. And they were all very easygoing and very nice to me. So that was good. That was a very welcoming crowd. I did not expect that, to tell you the truth. And so I delivered my opening remarks. I also had an initial thought of reading them in French, since I speak French and I had the French translation in front of me. But then I thought that everybody on Reddit would just go berserk if I read it in French. So I decided to cut my losses. And so I didn't do that. And it went very well. I was pleasantly surprised. The tone of the conversation was very open and welcoming. They were willing to hear the things. Keep in mind that I was really trying to split my focus between two audiences, or maybe three audiences. So my first audience were the senators who were in the room. My second audience were their constituents and sort of Canadian people in general who might be watching this, as well as advocates of Bitcoin and digital currencies who wanted to hear what I had to say. I was hoping to also provide some useful analogies and narratives that other Canadian advocates can use, as well as hoping that both the senators and their staff, because in many cases, if they don't understand technology, they have staff who are going to analyze the transcript afterwards. Those who support deregulation or non-regulation would have some good arguments to pose in future debates. So, and at the same time, I was keenly aware that every word I said would be scrutinized by Reddit and Twitter, and I would probably receive death threats because I paused too long before saying "don't regulate" or something like that, as always. Reddit is pretty vicious when it comes to criticism. So I delivered the presentation, and then I got the questions. They were all very, very interesting questions. I thought we got some good debate going on there. I was a bit concerned when the first question was about terrorism and ISIS, and I was hoping that we wouldn't have the entire conversation be about Bitcoin being a tool for terrorism, which is obviously a ridiculous statement, as you all know. And I was pleasantly surprised when we moved on to other topics. But by the end of it, the senators came up to me one by one and thanked me for appearing. They all said something nice to me. They were all very welcoming. One of the senators told me that during my presentation, they were almost brought to tears by the discussion about the unbanked and the economically disenfranchised people, which I thought was great because that's one of the main messages I wanted to talk about, the fact that Bitcoin isn't just for us. Um, in many cases, it's more for the other 6 billion. So yeah, that all in all, I think it was a very successful day for me, and I hope I represented Bitcoin well to Canada.
Yes, you did. You did very well. Everybody was extremely impressed. I put it on my Facebook feed, and a lot of my friends and family that are older, like in their 50s and 60s and so forth, they really enjoyed it because it helped make it relatable to them because they're kind of more mature. And then the Senate, most of the senators, as you saw, were mature ladies and men. So it really spoke to the older audience, which is great. Tell us a bit about your book, Andreas, and you know if you could show us your Bitcoin wallet later, those of us that torrented your book can send you some money for it.
Well, before we move on to the next topic, I would like to say that I had a lot of help in the Senate preparation. First of all, I collaborated in advance with both the Bitcoin Embassy of Canada as well as Bitcoin Decentral in Toronto. I spoke to several members of the local Canadian Bitcoin groups to ask them about concerns as well as issues that the Canadian Senate was bringing up. The opening remarks were sent in advance to a couple of trusted people in the Canadian Bitcoin community to review and give me some feedback, which was extremely helpful. And then I spent the 2 days before the Senate trials reading all of the transcripts and catching up on what had already happened, what had been discussed. And some friends helped me by doing some mock debates where they asked me questions that had come up before in the Senate transcripts, as well as harder questions and more pointed questions, and in some cases very uncomfortable questions, so that I could practice various responses. So a lot more went on behind the scenes, and a lot of people were involved. I kind of figured, this was a bit like, I'm not into sports, but for me this was game night. So some coaching and some team practice happened in advance of that presentation. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood that this wasn't just me. It was a team effort, and a lot of people contributed to making it a successful outcome.
Beautiful. Who picked out your tie?
I'm sorry?
Who picked out your tie for you? Was that
Actually, the tie I've had for years. It was a gift from a friend many years ago. They sell them at thinkgeek.com, which is a great resource where you can buy all kinds of interesting, geeky things, little gifts and things like that. It's perfect.
Great. Cool. So, yeah, the book. We want to talk about the book. That's awesome.
So the book is called Mastering Bitcoin. It's a project that I started. It seems like so long ago. It's a project that I started in, let's see, March of 2013, and with the help of many people, I put together a proposal. At the time, what I really wanted to do was, I thought it was important to have a book about Bitcoin focused on developers, one that would offer developers the opportunity to learn about cryptocurrencies and to study the topic. And how many people in this room are developers? Anybody?
About 10, 11 people.
All right, awesome.
Yeah.
So if you're a developer, then you probably know O'Reilly Media. Most developers I know have at least 2 or 3 O'Reilly books. And O'Reilly Media publishes a series of books called the Safari series, which have animals on the covers. And these are very well known as high quality technical books. And in fact, most of them are known simply by the animal that's on the cover. So, for example,
There we go. Recording.
all right, I lost you there.
Okay, we're back. We're
Okay,
back.
where did you lose me?
We were at O'Reilly Books, Animals.
All right. Are we live again? Okay, great. So yeah, every one who is involved in development probably has seen one of these O'Reilly books, and if you do Perl, you know the camel book. You know, if you've done St. Mill, you know the bat, etc. They're all very useful reference and overall books to understand technologies. When I made this proposal, I had 23 O'Reilly books on my bookshelf. And so when it came time to say, which publisher do I want to go for, all I had to do was look at my bookshelf. It was either that or there's probably one or two other software development publishers. And so in March of 2013, I started this process. I decided, you know what, I'm going to write the book for Bitcoin, which at the time, granted, was a ridiculously stupid idea. It was massive overreach on my end because I had been in Bitcoin for maybe just over a year and 3 months. I understood the technology not very deeply, but deeply enough that I could write some software around Bitcoin and I'd play with it, and I'd started a couple of projects that became companies and did some open source projects on Bitcoin. But really, I wasn't an expert at the time, and I'd never written a book at the time. So this is my first book. So it was a bit of an audacious project, and in retrospect, it was the kind of thing that really didn't make sense, which is good, because if I hadn't gone for that crazy idea, I wouldn't have published it. If I actually knew how much work it would be, I would have given up, then, and saved myself a lot of pain. Anyway, so I decided I'm going to pitch it to O'Reilly, so I went out and wrote a 23-page proposal where I dug up every article I've ever written and every person I knew in the media and publishing industry. I got an endorsement from all of them, and I submitted a proposal to O'Reilly. And one of the things I asked for in the proposal, I made two recommendations in the proposal which were rather critical, I think, in the development of the book. The first one was picking an animal, and the second one was, and I'll get to that in a second, the second one was asking that the book be open sourced from the beginning, which to me is a really big part of my ethos. I believe very strongly in open sourcing content of all types. Every speech, every presentation I do, everything I write, every piece of software I write, every article I write, everything I do is covered under Creative Commons licenses. So either CC by SA or CC by, and is available for anyone to reuse, to read, to mash up, and to share alike. And so I made that request. And then I requested that the animal on the cover be the leafcutter ant. So if you're wondering why there are bugs on the cover, a lot of people don't understand why on earth there are ants on the Bitcoin book cover. Some people said I should have had a honey badger, which would have made for a funny joke, but it's pretty insider joke, so most people would not understand the reference. It would also be, I don't know, I thought that would be slightly too cocky as an animal. So I used the leafcutter ant, and I want to explain why I used the leafcutter ant. There's actually a paragraph in the preface of the book which is called "Why Are There Bugs on the Cover?", which describes this. But the leafcutter ant is a fascinating animal because it creates the largest social structures and communities on the planet, second only to human beings. And ants are social animals, but what's interesting about them is that they form superorganisms. The colony of ants is a superorganism. And the leafcutter ant is a perfect example of a superorganism that exhibits emergent behavior that is far greater than the sum of the individual parts. So the individual parts, the little animals, the little insects, the ants, are not very intelligent. They can be simulated on a small circuit. They only have a handful of neurons, you know, a few thousand neurons, and they have very simplistic behaviors driven by pheromones. And yet, when you put a few 100,000 ants together in a colony, they become an intelligent superorganism. And here's the part that most people don't get. The reason they cut up leaves is not because they eat leaves. They don't eat leaves. They actually chew them up and then they ferment them with an enzyme and they make a paste. A bit like beer mash is made as a precursor to beer, or whiskey mash, pretty much the same thing. And then they feed that paste either to the larvae directly, or they feed it to aphids, and then they take the honeydew from aphids and feed that to the larvae. So they're simultaneously farming, they're craft brewers, and they also domesticated another insect species and farm it like cattle. And this is an astonishing function because they're the only species known outside of humans who domesticate another species and farm it. And not a single ant has this behavior in their DNA. That behavior emerges from a network following emergent behavior that is created by each member of that network, following a simple set of rules. And the emergent behavior that is created is super complex. So to me, that expresses Bitcoin. And I probably bored you to death with ants at this point. But to me, Bitcoin is amazing because at its heart is not a super smart system or a super smart network. At its heart is nothing. But instead, what Bitcoin does is it gives you, from a very simple set of mathematical rules that are followed by every single node in the network, you get this emergent complexity and this super intelligent network that does incredible things. That's why there's bugs on the cover. So the book is available open source. I started writing it. I was delayed quite a bit. O'Reilly eventually accepted my proposal. My editor told me at the time that the day I sent in the proposal, they received 3 Bitcoin book proposals that same day. So I feel very fortunate that they chose mine. And I started writing it really in January of 2014, and 9 months later delivered my final draft. It was all written on GitHub in ASCII doc markup language. It's all available online. You can see every single commit and every iteration of the chapters, all of the mistakes I made. One of the things I did in the book was I followed the advice of Ward Cunningham. Ward Cunningham invented wikis, and he was once asked, what's the best way to get the correct answer from the internet? And he said, well, the best way to get a correct answer from the internet is not to ask a question. It is to post the wrong answer, and the internet will smugly correct you. And so that was the process by which I published my book. I wrote it and I created the narrative, but in many cases I posted the wrong answer, and the internet smugly corrected me, and the book got a lot better. And so I have a lot of people to thank for that. The book is coming out in about mid-December probably, and it can be ordered online from O'Reilly or Amazon for US dollars. There's an ebook. The print copy is 284 pages in its final iteration. And it's a book for software developers. And you can also buy it for Bitcoin from my own site, bitcoinbook.info, although I have very limited supplies. I did a fundraiser there. People could buy a signed copy by adding $5 or $10 to their shopping cart. And I would donate that money to charity and sign a copy for the book. I had to shut it down after 270 copies of the book were sold, and I suddenly realized that carpal tunnel syndrome was in my future if I didn't stop these orders. But I did raise $1,700 for charity, so thank you everyone for whoever bought that. It was very good.
Is there anything that didn't make it into the book that you wish did?
Oh yeah, hell yes. Tons of things didn't make it into the book. I think I realized something really about halfway through. I realized that the book is never done. There's no part of the book that I couldn't have written better. There's no part of the book that I wouldn't improve today if I had another 10 months. And this book wasn't really finished. It was creatively abandoned. I don't remember which author said that, but he said no book is ever finished. Most books are just creatively abandoned when the deadline arrives, and that's exactly what happened. At some point, I decided, from now on, everything else that I want to do has to go in the second edition, and that's all she wrote. So I had to give up at some point and face the deadline. There will be a second edition if Bitcoin is still around a year from now. I think it will be, but I have a multi-book deal with O'Reilly, and I intend to write a second edition of the book. I'm probably going to be starting that in about 6 months.
Wow, crazy! You're a busy man, Andreas. Alex, you have another question?
Yeah, for sure.
I'd like to just keep it to Q&A from now on. Thank you so much. I'd love to take questions from the audience, and we'll just do open Q&A.
Yeah, what countries do you think have the best grasp on what Bitcoin really is, if any?
Countries that have the best grasp. I don't think any country really has the best grasp on Bitcoin. The internet, the networked country, has the best grasp on what Bitcoin is. And, I think even the people who are in Bitcoin, all of us really don't know where this is going. We have some inkling. We have some visions of the future, I guess, and some of us are a bit audacious in our visions, but nevertheless, I don't think any of us can really predict where this is going, and I think any prediction, however fantastical it may appear, will probably in the long run fall short of where Bitcoin will be. And the reason I say that is because for me, Bitcoin is kind of the sixth major technology revolution that I've experienced in my life. I started with my first computer in 1982, my first modem in 1986, my first internet connection or access to the internet, proto-internet in 1989, first website in 1992, first Linux operating system in late 93, and then Bitcoin. And every single time, what surprised me the most is I knew that these things, when I first experienced every single one of these things, I knew they were huge. I knew they were going to be enormously impactful in the world. And nobody believed me, primarily because through many of these I was, 12 or 14 or so they said things like, yeah, Andreas, I'm sure we'll all be shopping online eventually, but why don't you go do some homework now? And so the thing that I learned from all of these things is that even my most incredible visions of the future, the most fantastical things I could possibly imagine as a kid when I went on the first website, I thought, okay, this is going to be just enormous. I could never quite imagine Facebook or Twitter or any of the things that came afterwards. It wasn't even possible to go that far. So with Bitcoin, I have to think that even my most amazed ramblings that you often hear on my videos probably don't even scratch the surface of the kind of impact Bitcoin could have in a decade and a half or so. We're all going to be surprised.
Okay, but speaking of the future, everything's trying to do we're Bitcoin 2.0, like doing asset issuance and things from counterparty to Ethereum. So what if all these so-called 2.0 things do you think is actually going to end up making a difference?
I think all of them are going to make a difference. I don't know which one's going to persist, but I think all of them are going to make a difference. They're all exploring slightly different parameters of the search space, if you like. They're all filling different niches. They're taking slightly different approaches. They have different teams approaching things in different ways. And that means that there's still an enormous amount of experimentation to do that. The interplay of programmable money and smart contracts and smart law and digital currencies and tokens and resource allocating markets, and it's just so enormous, and it has impact in so many places in our lives that I think all of these projects are going to make some impact on the future. Who knows which ones are going to survive? Probably several are going to continue to grow and become influential.
Anybody have a question?
Yeah, I do.
Keep going.
Go ahead.
Andreas, my name is Trent Nelson from CryptoBiz Magazine. First of all, I want to say I appreciate what you did in front of the Canadian Senate. I really think that the way they received you, and you know, the last question you answered will be the way that they set policy. I honestly believe, you know, 3 to 5 years, we're going to see no regulation here in Canada as per your recommendation. My question is kind of more of a personal nature. You've done a lot of things within this industry since you've been involved. You've been the guy. You know, I want to know what has affected you most, or what have you felt most personally about? What has given you your biggest thrill since you've been involved in Bitcoin?
Honestly, I think probably the November 2013 conference, LA BitConf, the Latin American Bitcoin conference in Argentina, was a turning point for me. Until then, I understood that this was a technology that was going to have an enormous impact, and I had already started talking about the other 6 billion, about the unbanked, about remittances and things like that. But the conference in Argentina was the first time I came face to face with what was effectively my audience for that particular message. But at the same time, if you look at it from a different perspective, my inspiration for that kind of message, I saw people who had been devastated by hyperinflation. I met people who had personal stories to tell me about being devastated several times in a single generation, and about, you know, the absolute horrors of the Argentinian government, of which currency manipulation was kind of the least of it, but was a natural extension of a totalitarian regime, and it brought everything home for me. It really made this entire thing about the people that are most affected by economic control imposed through currency, and I became quite a bit more passionate about how important it is to preserve Bitcoin and to preserve features in Bitcoin such as anonymity, and to ensure that Bitcoin isn't diluted and turned into a shopping payment network a la slightly better Visa for the Western world, because we don't need that. But what they need in Argentina, which is a currency that gives them an exit from what was a horrible regime and what is now simply an incompetent government. But I'm sure the horrible regimes exist in many other places in the world, and so for them this is a choice, an alternative choice, and an exit from dire circumstances. And I think we need to work very hard to preserve Bitcoin as that.
So do you think there's a risk of development going in a way that would really, like, you know, stifle Bitcoin, like in what it potentially could be? Is that a real risk?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the first speeches I gave during the presentation, and even before that in April of 2013 in San Jose, which was the first Bitcoin conference, I talked about Bitcoin neutrality and the need to preserve Bitcoin neutrality. And it was informed by the net neutrality discussion on the internet. And this was pre-Snowden. You know, the battle for freedom for Bitcoin is a continuation of the battle to keep the internet free. And the battle to keep the internet free is one I've been involved in since the early 90s, and it's one that has had, well, we've had several battles, and we've won some and we've lost some. We won the Clipper chip wars, we won the crypto wars, we won the standards wars. We were able to keep the internet open and keep peer-to-peer routing and net neutrality going long enough that it became unstoppable. And then we lost some. We lost the surveillance battle. We lost to Prism. And now a new generation of people are now growing up on an internet that for them has never been free, that for them has never been unsurveilled. So if you look at children today who are getting their first access to the internet, I don't know, 6, 7 years old, maybe even younger, they start actually going out on the internet by themselves. They're no longer on the same internet that I joined. They're on a fully surveilled totalitarian information system that they will never know what a free internet was like unless they fight to regain that freedom. And so the fight for Bitcoin is only a continuation of that fight, and I think it's a very important fight. I think it's a global fight, and it's one that's worth fighting.
I guess I'll go for a question. Andreas, ever since being in the Bitcoin, involved in the Bitcoin community and in general, what are your biggest valuable mistakes that you've found, that you've had, that are most important for you?
I'm sorry, the biggest mistakes that I've made?
What are the most valuable mistakes or...
Valuable mistakes?
Yes.
Okay. Well, oh gosh, I've made so many mistakes in this space. Let's see. I think the same mistake that all of us made, which is thinking that $100 Bitcoin might have been a bit expensive and I didn't buy loads of it. And before that, thinking that $30 Bitcoin was a bit expensive and I didn't buy loads of that either. And before that, thinking the $5 Bitcoin was a bit expensive and I didn't buy loads of that. That's a mistake I'm hoping not to make again, primarily by buying loads of it. I've made some mistakes in terms of trusting people and being burned by that. And my mistakes are very broadly publicized and seized upon and hit upon by some really professional and effective and organized trolls who remind me of them every time I post something. And so, let's see. I consulted for NeoNB, which was a company in Cyprus that I thought was interesting. I thought they had an appealing idea, and I certainly thought that Cyprus could use cryptocurrencies. So I offered them some advisory services, and at the time, I did not anticipate that they would kind of abuse my name, I guess, make it appear like I was doing more for them or that I had endorsed them. I never actually publicly endorsed them. I didn't tell people. I certainly didn't tell people to buy any of their stock or anything like that. I never do that. I didn't endorse their product either. But I did say in public that I was consulting with them and offering them advice, which I did many times for a number of different topics. And when the CEO ran away with the money, a lot of people said I should have done more due diligence with my clients, my choice of clients, which, is a fair criticism. I think it's unfair if you're an investor to expect someone else to do the due diligence that you didn't do, especially someone who's just a consultant. But, what I realized that at the time, I didn't realize that my reputation could be abused because I didn't really think I had much of a reputation in the space. And apparently I had enough for it to be abused. After that, I put a clause in my contract that says that companies that I advise cannot mention my name in public at all unless I approve it in advance. And so you don't know about the companies I advise now because they have to use my advice and not my name. So I have to protect my reputation. Another probably painful mistake for me was, I had been very critical of mt-gox from the very, very beginning. Back in probably March of 2013, I started telling people not to trust mt-gox. I often talk about the dangers of custodial accounts and centralization in Bitcoin, and how if you put your money in a place where you don't control the keys, then don't be surprised if the person who controls the keys runs away with your money. And I had said that many times about mt-gox. When the whole transaction malleability thing happened, I continued to call Karpelès and his management style grossly incompetent, criminally incompetent at some point. I did call him that. Clownish. Clownishly incompetent. But I didn't go as far as calling what he was doing embezzlement. I didn't have any information about that, so if I had said something like that, I could have opened myself to additional liability as well. And then when he, together with several other exchanges, shut down their withdrawals, I felt I was involved with a few of them, and with the effort to help them get back. I was also asked by many media sources to talk about that topic and offer my opinion. And one of the things I said was, I don't think transaction malleability is such a big thing. I think all of the exchanges will be back relatively quickly. And I could see online that Karpelès was trying to supposedly fix this, as was everybody else. And I could see that they were, I knew that it wasn't a huge problem. So then I made a really fatal mistake, which is I went online and I said on Twitter, among thousands and thousands of tweets that I make, I said, transaction malleability isn't such a big deal. I think Gox is going to be back within a week or so. And yeah, they never came back. So at the time, I thought that even if transaction malleability had caused some withdrawals to go bad, I assumed that since there was cold storage and that was something discussed by Gox, that it wouldn't have affected that. There was no way transaction malleability could affect cold storage. Of course, now we know there was no cold storage. It was warmish storage, and anything above absolute zero is not cold storage, it's hot storage. If it's warm, it's hot. So, in a strict technical sense, I was correct. Transaction malleability was not such a big deal, and Gox could have fixed it. In the broader sense, though, that tweet and my wishful thinking that Gox was going to come back may have led some people to make some bad investments, and I certainly got very broadly criticized for that. So after bashing them for months and months and months and months, I said I don't think transaction malleability is such a big deal. I think they're going to come back. I regret saying that now. And so I make mistakes. I'm human too. Certainly take what I say with a grain of salt, and I try generally not to endorse products. I certainly try to warn people not to invest their money with custodial accounts, and certainly not to invest in Bitcoin as if it's a day trading stock or something like that, and mostly to invest in skills. But I don't always keep on message, and in 10,000 tweets, I'm sure you can dig up a few that I am not proud of.
I had a question regarding, sorry, Anthony. Regarding investing in skills, what skills do you recommend a non-developer that's interested in becoming a developer investing in? What languages would you recommend?
I'm a big fan of Python, and I think it's a language that is both extremely versatile. It's easy for beginners to learn. It's elegant, and it's very well suited for mashing up and gluing together a whole bunch of open source projects to rapidly prototype something. So it's also rewarding in that you get results quickly and you can feel that you've achieved something. So I think most newbies can learn Python relatively easily and do something interesting with Bitcoin and Python. It's part of the reason I chose to illustrate my examples in the book with Python.
Nice. Anthony, question?
You mentioned about transaction malleability earlier. How do you feel about the Bitcoin protocol maintenance project of the BIPs and the reference implementation. Is it fundamentally broken? Are we going to run into problems in the future?
I'm a big fan of the BIP structure. I'm not sure exactly who started it. I think Amir Taki wrote BIP1, but I don't know who started the entire process. It's something that was borrowed from Python and probably other projects before that. So in Python, there's PIPs, or Python Improvement Proposals, and I'm sure this exists in other languages too. I'm a big fan of that because it offers a decentralized model for standardization. So an ability for people to agree on a technical standard, documented clearly, provides test vectors and use cases that illustrate the standard, and then make it broadly available after a comment period. So I think that is a very good organizational principle. It's the same that's being used in many open source projects. I would say overall, I think Bitcoin's governance model and code development model is extremely healthy and well managed. I've got to tell you, I'm not a Bitcoin core developer. I haven't contributed code to Bitcoin. I've written peripheral things for myself. I've done software projects related to Bitcoin. I haven't contributed code to Bitcoin, which in the eyes of many core developers, perhaps arguably for good reasons, makes me a media shill and an empty shell because I haven't written any code. But I very much respect the work they do, and even if I disagree with some of the decisions made by some of the core developers, there's a very healthy level of debate going on, and there's a very big diversity of opinion within the development community around Bitcoin. So I think it's a really nicely run project. It's just a matter of scaling it up as it grows to a bigger and bigger audience, and of course as it's being pulled in different directions. Bitcoin can't be everything for everyone, so some people want to push it more in a payments network direction, and some people want to push it in a micropayments direction. Some people want to push it in a direction towards more anonymity and decentralization. There's all kinds of competing interests. Interest in a good way, not as a bad word. And I think they all find healthy debate and have advocates who are passionate about each of those positions, and you get some very good outcomes. I think Bitcoin is pretty well managed.
Hey Andreas, I'm a big fan from Let's Talk Bitcoin. And my name's Alex Miller. When you followed me on Twitter, I lost my pretty exciting day. I got a couple questions for you. One is, what's your favorite charity? And the second is, if in the future Bitcoin were to usurp the US dollar as the global reserve currency, what do you think that would mean for inequality? Would it decrease or increase inequality? And sort of a related question is that important, or are we distracting from the real issue, which is poverty?
Oh, okay. So that's a triple question. Really good question. Thank you. So charities. In the Bitcoin space, I'm hugely supportive of Sean's Outpost. I consider Jason King, who runs Sean's Outpost, a good friend. And I think that what he's doing on the ground to feed homeless people in Pensacola, and just generally the model of charity that he's demonstrating, which is focused on outcomes, and in this case, outcomes is sandwiches. It's a very, very pragmatic, down-to-earth, measurable, 120,000 meals served in just over a year. They're making a real impact, and doing so under difficult conditions. So I'm a huge supporter of Sean's Outpost. There are many other charities in my personal life outside of Bitcoin, and one of the charities I'm trying to get into Bitcoin. I've supported I've done a number of charitable fundraisers for a charity that I support, which is called RAIN, and RAIN is a charity that supports victims of abuse. And so I'm very supportive of that charity. It's the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. The name is a bit shocking, but the cause is extremely powerful. So that covers the charity question. Let me see, what else did you ask me about? If Bitcoin replaces the world reserve currency, the dollar, will it lead to greater or lesser inequality? I don't know. I think the idea of a world reserve currency in itself is a somewhat obsolete concept. I think as a concept, it exists in a world where currency creation is scarce, and currencies are sovereign by fiat decree. As far as I'm concerned, after 2008, we now live in a post-sovereign currency world, whether we know it yet or not, whether most people realize it or not. I've often said this, it's a bit of a slogan. Until 2008, sovereignty created currency. After 2008, currency creates sovereignty. And we now have a currency that is creating sovereignty. It's creating sovereign power. It's creating purchasing power. It's creating economic activity of its own on the internet, independent of any sovereign. And I think that is a very powerful model. Whether that model disrupts the world sufficiently that even the concept of a reserve currency, a currency that others hold in order to do foreign exchange, makes sense. I mean, the concept of a reserve currency really has two meanings. One is that other companies hold reserves in that currency in order to use in exchange in international trade. And the primary reason that occurs is because that currency is the primary currency with which you can buy the most important energy unit, which is oil. So the concept of a world reserve currency cannot easily be separated from the petrodollar, from the oil purchasing power of the dollar. If countries could buy oil without dollars, it's doubtful that they would maintain reserves to the extent that they do. And so all of that, I think, is a rather archaic way of looking at the world. And by archaic, I mean in full force today, but probably already changing as we speak because of the invention of cryptocurrency. So I don't think there will be a world reserve currency, and therefore it doesn't need to be Bitcoin. I think there will be thousands of currencies, and they will be so easily tradable and liquid that there will be no need to have reserves as such as in a specific currency. And the second question is, I don't think Bitcoin solves inequality, not in its own. I think what Bitcoin does is it changes the interaction between individuals and the state, and the relationship between individuals, money, and the state. It creates separation of money and state, and separation of money and state is the first step. I think what that does is it causes less corruption, probably less control by authoritarian governments, and more freedom. And in the long run, that probably changes the parameters of inequality. But Bitcoin in itself doesn't reduce inequality. If anything, many people argue that Bitcoin in itself has built in a pretty decent dollop of inequality from the way it's been hoarded and collected by early adopters. The only difference is that instead of manufacturing an oil tycoons from the turn of the century, the next global elite will be neckbeard, ponytail geeks, and the weirdos who thought this was actual money when everybody else thought it was magic internet beans. But that doesn't change, replacing one elite with another doesn't really change the game. I hope that answered your question. It was a kind of long-winded answer, sorry.
Thanks very much.
You mentioned your biggest mistake was trust, and a mistake a lot of people make is trusting exchanges. So for the last year, we've seen lots of talk of proof of solvency. Do you know if that's ever actually been implemented in a way that really works in real time? Or is it still just prove it once and then numbers in a database on the exchange, no one really knows?
As far as I know, nobody's implemented any kind of recurring proof of solvency or continuous proof of solvency. I've seen it implemented once in one place, and I thought it was an interesting experiment, but that didn't change the underlying dynamic of custodial accounts. I think proof of solvency is a problem you have when you have custodial accounts, and the real problem is the custodial accounts. If you can get away from those, I think multi-signature is a better solution. But another really interesting solution, which is being worked on by a whole group of people, is voting pools, which is kind of like a multi-exchange, multi-signature scheme whereby exchanges put all of their reserves in a common pool, and then they all have to vote to withdraw money from that pool based on customer orders. So essentially, exchanges police each other by combining their risk. I think that's a very interesting idea, but we've barely scratched the surface. There are many technological controls that can be applied to make decentralized currencies secure for consumers without the need to centralize them.
Is that like open transactions? Is that what you're talking about with the voting pools?
Yeah, open transactions in conjunction with some work being done by, I'm trying to remember the name of the group. I'm not quite sure what they're called. Justice Renvier and a few others are working on that.
Are you currently advising for any companies?
Yes.
Yes, I advise a number of companies, either in terms of cryptocurrency strategy or just more broadly. I have quite a lot of experience with startups and consulting and market strategy and analysis. So I do advise companies. I can't say which they are. I don't endorse their products. If you hear me not talking about the company, maybe I work for them.
Okay, I'm just trying to get you to say any names. And can entropy be reversed?
Yes. In fact, I've recently completed construction of a machine that uses entropy reversal to produce 101% of the energy fed into it. I will be selling that machine for $99 at a Kickstarter. No, entropy can't be reversed.
Did you see the Lockheed Martin confirmation of cold fusion? Did you catch that article?
All right, what was that again? I can't, the microphone doesn't pick up the room very well.
Apparently, Lockheed has said that they had a major breakthrough in cold fusion. I don't know, maybe that happens all the time, but.
Oh yeah, the compact fusion reactor CFR machine that they've built. Very interesting stuff. I'm betting somewhere, someone with probably a neckbeard and a ponytail, and I mean that in the most respectful way, because I think people like that achieve some of the most miraculous things in technology and deserve respect. Is thinking very hard about how to hook up a Lockheed Martin CFR fusion machine to a mining rig and use it to mine Bitcoin.
Other than like secure online payments, like what does Bitcoin have to offer the older generation in the first world?
That's a good question.
Yeah, not much until the bail-ins start. Once the bail-ins start, much.
For your bank accounts.
And what I mean by that is, we're about to enter interesting times. I think most people don't realize this, and if you certainly won't see it when you're watching the news, and I think our generation hasn't realized we're in this, but people alive today are experiencing the world's worst currency crisis in 2 centuries, and one that is now affecting almost all currencies in the world simultaneously, which has never happened before, at a time when governments are indebted to the highest level they've ever been in history, and economic activity is suffering tremendously at the moment. Most people don't realize that this is a unique event. This is not business as usual. We're not looking at another cycle. We're looking at a moment when For example, in the U.S., the Fed has pumped $7 trillion into the economy in 5 years, and last month announced that they're going to stop this month. If you've been paying attention to the markets over the last couple of weeks, you see what happens when the artificially maintained health of the economy suddenly gets withdrawn. The U.S. economy, at least over the last 5 years, is like a cocaine addict that's being given a daily fix, and they just got their fix removed, and bad things are going to happen. So, I think we live in very interesting times when the possibility for global financial risk is extremely high. Regardless of what you see on the financial markets. In fact, the fact that nobody talks about these things is quite surprising to me, but it's also an indication of a big problem. And if you ask people in Cyprus if they thought that, come Friday, banks would close and not open the next week, and then when they opened again a week later, a third of their money would be gone, they would think that was not going to happen until it did. And so I think there is a strong possibility that we're going to see significant bank problems in the Western world in the next couple of years. And at that point, people who have some of their savings, at least in Bitcoin, will be shielded from that. So it may be an interesting time. That's part of the reason why I don't think Bitcoin is really important for the developed world, is because we're pampered and comfortable. And if we become uncomfortable suddenly, then currency and inflation and deflation become relevant topics. They become household conversations. And that's one of the things I saw in Argentina, is that you can go to the street corner and have a conversation about inflation with someone, and they will have a very nuanced and sophisticated opinion, because inflation is something they need to discuss because it's decimated them. And until it decimates you, you don't care about inflation.
On the note of that question about the economy and how things affect people, do you think we're in such a marvelous time technologically on so many fronts? We saw Elon Musk's new car and presentation yesterday, I'm sure. And then you probably saw South Park in the evening, which was really funny as well. But do you think we can grow?
I don't have a TV.
That's all right.
Neither do
So
we.
I didn't see any of those things.
No one has.
I haven't had a TV in almost a decade.
No one has a TV. But do you think with what's happening right now, there seems to be a lot of catalytic activity across the broad spectrum of industry right now? Food, medicine, automotive sector. Obviously, Detroit probably a little bit nervous right now. Do you think we can grow out of this period of economic crisis, if you will, with where we're going technologically? Do you think we can grow out through? We spent so much to feed ourselves. Do you think we can grow now to pay off our debt? Do you think we can pay off the debt? That's what I'm saying.
We don't have.
Yeah, I don't think we can pay off the debt. I don't think anybody can pay off any of the debt ever in any of the developed countries. I think we're going to have a grand debt conflagration at some point, and it's all going to go away together with the banks that hold it. Like a tower of cards that collapses. But that doesn't necessarily matter for individual people. Whether the debt is there or not is not the issue. The issue is whether the economic activity that can be sustained and whether production can be sustained so they can eat. But I feel extremely optimistic. The things that are happening in technology, from automation to the internet to 3D printing to drones and Bitcoin and 3D printed Bitcoin drones and combine them all together. I actually have a couple of drones in my closet here, which I 3D printed, and I don't sell them for Bitcoin, but it's an interesting combination. Maybe an application that rents them for Bitcoin would be kind of the trifecta of nerdvana. So, but I feel tremendously optimistic about the developments in technology. The main problem is that for most people, economic activity and wealth have been disconnected from each other. So, the current system rewards those who play financial casino gambling games on computers rather than those who produce things or who innovate. In fact, the system is designed so that innovation is sucked out, and it's not profitable to innovate in the U.S. anymore. It's far more profitable to take a stream of QE2 money from the Fed, leverage it, derivatize it, chunk it together with other assets, financialize it, remortgage it, repothecize it, sell it on the secondary market so it can be created into a derivative to sell on the tertiary market so that you can then high frequency trade it with algorithmic bots. And all of that is bullshit. It's not real economic activity, and we spend an enormous amount of time and productivity and effort doing that. And it seems to me, at least here in the US, a lot of the rest of the economic productivity is spent on perpetual war. I'm not a particular fan of either of those. I think, for the amount of money that we spend bombing ISIS, we could be developing medicine or doing things like that. And I believe in technology and innovation and human capacity and potential. So, yeah, we can grow out of these things, but we have to first stop wasting human potential. Not a chance that's going to happen anytime soon.
Hi. I just have a quick question. You mentioned at the Senate hearing that you started off as a skeptic of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
What were you skeptical about?
Oh, all of it. The first time I heard about Bitcoin, I had the exact same reaction most of you had, which was, and I say this very clearly, nerd money, that's never going to work. And I'm a nerd. So, I believe in nerd things, and in this particular case, I thought it was silly. I thought it was fake, and I didn't understand it, and I dismissed it without trying to understand it because, like most people, I was busy doing other things. And at some point, I sat down and I read the white paper. The second time I heard about Bitcoin, I read Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper. And because I have a background in distributed systems, I understood it, and I understood the implications of it, and I understood that it solved the Byzantine general problem, and I understood how much of a big deal that was. And I'd been involved in digital currencies and cryptocurrencies for years, since the early 90s when I first got interested in things like DigiCash and chromium binding and things like that in the digital currency space. So, I was primed. I should not have dismissed it. I should have been more open to it. And when I read the paper, I already had the prerequisites, if you like. I had the software pre-installed in my brain to understand and recognize what this was because I'd been involved in it. And that's an advantage most people don't have because they're not, in this particular space of computer science that I was at the time. So I absolutely understand when people first hear about Bitcoin and are quite rationally skeptical. And for many people who have a lot of experience, in fact, the more experience you have in finance, the more bullshit you think Bitcoin is. Which is something that happens in technology and innovation and disruptive technologies all the time. The people who are least able to understand massively disruptive change are the ones who are absolutely immersed in the current paradigm and are so shaped by it that they can't possibly think outside it. It takes an outsider usually to break through. And so, I'm not surprised that people are skeptics. I was very much a skeptic. I thought it was ridiculous. And then I looked into it and I realized that it wasn't ridiculous. And the more you look into it, the more people look into it, they discover more and more to Bitcoin. They understand that you go down the rabbit hole. You start off thinking, okay, so maybe this does work as money. It's kind of cool how you can scan something with your phone. And then you just get sucked in, and it gets more and more fascinating. And then you start hearing about registries and assets. And then you start hearing about altcoins. You're like, oh, there's more of them, and then you start hearing about smart property and smart contracts and all kinds of things like that. And eventually, you have to be eating TV dinners because you've forgotten how to cook for yourself because you're so obsessed about this currency. I tell people this story that when I first discovered Bitcoin, the 5 months following my discovery of Bitcoin, I lost 26 pounds, which is a lot because I'm not really overweight, and and that was because I was in a state of absolute obsession. I just became so overwhelmed by the need to understand and read more and research more, and so fascinated by this technology that I would spend 16 to 18 hours a day just reading about Bitcoin, nonstop, reading, programming, writing, discussing Bitcoin with everybody I knew until I forgot to eat. And at some point I had my loved ones stage an intervention. It wasn't a major intervention, but they brought me some what's it called? Some Ensure, which is like this protein drink that old people have or hospital patients have. It's kind of like a super boost protein drink because I wasn't eating and I was losing weight so fast that it was beginning to worry people around me. And now I have a healthy work-life relationship, which means I only work 16 to 18 hours a day, but I actually eat. So
you're obviously like super passionate from the start. Is there like anything like what drives you? Is there like a specific event that like why you found Bitcoin and act this way, or like is there like with financial stuff, like what drives you to be like this?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a geek. And so technology does this to me. Technology has done this to me my entire life. I got my first computer, my mother bought me. My mother, who's a complete Luddite technophobe, can't even stand this stuff, really, had the inspiration to recognize that I wasn't like that, and in fact I was interested in this stuff, and bought me a computer when I was 10 and a half. And this is pre-PC era. This is like a Sinclair ZX81. We're talking about a 1K, no permanent storage, connect to your TV mini computer. But it had basic programming language. And that was my first experience. And I can tell you, I had a very similar experience with that as I had with Bitcoin. I disappeared for 6 months. And I got this computer and I started using it, and I just spent more and more and more hours doing this. And 6 months later, I could program not just in BASIC but in ZX81 assembler code, and I had reprogrammed the graphics chip to add more colors, and was writing games and doing sprite dynamics and crap like that, which was crazy. And I was completely lost to the world. So I do that. It's one of the things that I think a lot of geeks do that, right? You get really, really interested in something, it takes a certain personality, and you get passionate about it, and then you get lost in it. And I've done that many times in my life. If I get really passionate about something, I get lost in it. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. We'll see.
I was just going to ask you, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
It's great.
I've survived 6 of them. As long as I keep surviving them, I think it's great. I mean, I've made a career out of several of these phases, and I enjoy myself while I'm doing it.
True.
And I try to surround myself with people who find it adorable rather than annoying. And as long as I do that, I'm okay.
You're in the right room here.
Yeah.
Yeah, Andreas, you're adorable.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about your insights maybe into the other apps, other blockchain apps. More and more starting to come out. And I'm kind of wondering about why those other apps are not using the original Bitcoin blockchain. Is there something wrong with the Bitcoin blockchain with respect to like the analogy of a phone network as opposed to a packet switch network? Is Bitcoin not packet switch enough?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I wouldn't say it's not good enough. You got to understand that there are some particular compromises and design choices built into Bitcoin. When Satoshi Nakamoto released the first edition of the source code and showed the software to the world, you got to understand, people did not greet him with like exclamations of "Wow, this is amazing." First of all, everybody thought it was not going to work. And secondly, everybody who looked at the code then realized very quickly that Satoshi Nakamoto wasn't a very good programmer. And I'm sure that's sacrilegious to say, but you can be a genius and not a professional programmer, not someone who designs code for a living. In my opinion, looking at that code, probably someone who was involved maybe in physics or sciences or research scientist with a strong coding background. Now, keep in mind, when I say that, Satoshi's better coder than I am. But compared to, say, the core development team and people who are professional, disciplined coders who write well-architected modular code, et cetera, this thing was an absolute hairball. And among other things, it contained many, many serious bugs in the beginning. So one of the first things that happened with Bitcoin was the stripping out of a lot of the functionality that existed in the prototype code to make it much more secure and useful as a production currency. Even before people thought it was going to be a really usable currency, they could see the potential security problems. One of the early decisions was to make the language within the transaction scripting a Turing incomplete language. And I don't know how many people in the audience understand what this means, but transactions are not simply like checks where you have 3 lines and you write from, to, and the amount, although they appear like that to us. Behind the scenes, there is a scripting language, and that scripting language allows you to construct essentially spending criteria, or as they're called in Bitcoin, encumbrances, where you can lock an amount of Bitcoin with a specific script. It's like an incantation, and if you have the incantation that unlocks that script, then you can spend it. And in most of these, the locking is, present the right public key and signature, and the unlocking script is, here's a public key and signature, so it looks exactly the same as a straightforward transaction. But it's a full language, and it's capable of a hell of a lot more. That language was designed in such a way as to remove a few key functions, specifically looping conditional statements. And what that does is it cripples the language somewhat, and it stops it from being able to express any arbitrary program. And that was done for security reasons. Also, a lot of the more complex script operands were disabled in the beginning. Now, back in 2012, they started re-enabling some of the more important ones. We saw the introduction of multi-signature technology, and gradually the scripting language has gotten more sophisticated and more powerful. So, if you like, the trajectory of Bitcoin was at first a complete mess. Pardon me. Then a restricted kind of language in order to make it secure and robust and to remove all of the bugs. And then gradually, as experience was built and the code was cleaned up, features started to be added back in. And that keeps happening. Just maybe a couple of months ago, Gavin Andreessen lifted a major restriction in the code which forced pay-to-script hash addresses and scripts to be one of the standard scripts, and instead opened it up so that any script can be used in a pay-to-script hash address, which massively expands the range of possible transaction scripts and smart contracts, if you like, that can be built in Bitcoin. So you've got to realize that for some people, Bitcoin isn't moving fast enough in terms of features, and they decided, well, we're going to do something that's much more featureful. And one of the attitudes that expresses that very directly is Ethereum, and Ethereum's goal is to be a Turing-complete scripting language that can express pretty much everything in a bytecode scripting language. And so the real question is, can you simultaneously have an infinitely flexible transaction scripting language and a massively robust, very secure currency platform that cannot be hacked, cannot be denied service, and can sustain broad attacks, perhaps by governments, perhaps by non-state actors, perhaps by hacker groups? That question hasn't been answered yet. We know that Bitcoin can sustain those attacks. So we know that the very simple script language can be secure. We don't know if the more featureful can remain secure, and the Bitcoin development team is taking a very slow and conservative approach to adding features. It may be that that's the wrong answer, in which case you'll see some of these Bitcoin 2.0 things delivering a lot more functionality faster to the audience, and if they maintain security while doing that, then they may find greater applications than currency. So you may see some of the applications coming out in these other currencies or other blockchains in the sort of 2.0 blockchain technologies. Alternatively, we may see that it turns out you really need a robust currency to support these applications, in which case you may see them mostly being developed on a slower pace on the Bitcoin network. From my perspective, I think it's kind of funny that we're talking about slower versus faster pace, because what we're talking about here is completely redesigning financial networks from scratch and changing the nature of institutions that have existed in some cases for centuries and in other cases for millennia, and decentralizing functions that have never been decentralized before, and implementing a new modality of thinking and new paradigms in financial networks, in corporate governance, in social organization, and trade, and international trade, and international commerce, and in so many different spaces. So the idea that we've done quite a bit in 3 years, but that's too slow. Could we please change the world in the next 2? It seems a bit ridiculous, right? Keep in mind that the biggest bottleneck here is not technology. The biggest bottleneck here is society's ability to absorb change. And while we're in the bubble and talking about Bitcoin 2.0, there are people who still can't stomach the very basic concept of a decentralized secure network as Bitcoin was envisioned in 2008. They're still grappling with that idea, and that's 99.9% of humanity. And meanwhile, we're 5 years ahead talking about Bitcoin 2.0. Once you start riding the Bitcoin dragon, you have to be used to living in the future and being extremely impatient with the fact that the rest of the world is not moving fast enough in that direction.
Yes. So you talk a lot about blockchain technology and not just Bitcoin, and how blockchain technology is like really the big thing here. So like, what are like the more obscure things that you think blockchain technology will be applied to in the future?
So the reason I don't think Bitcoin is the main I mean, obviously I'm huge into Bitcoin, so don't take that the wrong way. But Bitcoin, Bitcoin means several different things, so you have to be careful with the terms. There's the Bitcoin network, there's the Bitcoin currency, and then there's Bitcoin kind of the invention. I think Bitcoin, the invention, is most important. Second is Bitcoin, the network, and third is the currency, but none of them can exist on their own. And the reason I think the invention is important is because you can do more than just currency. In the long run, the idea of creating specialized resource tokens that allow us to create markets in places that markets have not existed is, to me, one of the most exciting opportunities. So today, there are many areas of human activity where markets don't exist, primarily because price discovery or trade or exchange of goods is infeasible or inefficient or impossible. I don't routinely share my Wi-Fi connection for profit because there's no easy way for me to bill other people for my Wi-Fi in such a way that it would make it a reasonable payment for them and a reasonable profit for me. There's a mismatch between the supply is too limited, the demand is too limited. There's no possibility of a market emerging that will make those two things meet. Now you introduce microtransactions and resource sharing tokens, etc., and suddenly you have supply, demand, and price converging and price discovery happening on a resource that was never previously thought of as a market. Mike Hearn has discussed some examples that are interesting, which perhaps may not be realistic, but are certainly mind teasers as to what might happen. One of those, for example, is to have a carpool lane where an automated car pays fraction of a pennies to other drivers to have them move out of the lane. So rather than essentially you don't have an HOV lane. Every lane is an HOV as long as you're willing to pay for it. And you pay for other cars to get out of your way, and they get out of your way, and they make an income, and you spend some money. I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't know if that would work. What I do know is that the idea that you could do that depends on having a small enough transaction size that you can create a market where supply and demand for that resource, which is road, could be created. And blockchain-based currencies open up the possibility of having markets where markets have not existed before. So part of this is, we're going to do really exciting things in existing markets, but the more interesting thing is we're going to have markets where markets have never existed before, and for things that have never been sold or traded before, and for human activities that are going to be organized around market-like structures that have never been organized that way before. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's certainly a fascinating thing.
So is that the commodification of everything, basically?
Yeah, it's the Internet of Things meets the Internet of Money, which means the commodification of everything, yeah.
Crazy. Any other? We have time for two more questions.
No, we got the basic one. We always ask the people the same thing. Who's your favorite person in Bitcoin, or maybe like a top three?
Well, that's kind of an obvious answer, really. Have you ever had anyone say anything other than Satoshi Nakamoto?
Mostly, yeah.
We get a lot of you, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, well, no. Yeah, Satoshi Nakamoto is my favorite person in Bitcoin. She invented something that the world had never seen before, and for that we must all thank her.
But we're fishing for guest ideas. So you need like a top three.
For guest ideas.
Who would be awesome?
Everybody's awesome, but who would you recommend?
There's so many people in this. I can't really narrow it down. There are so many people in this space that are fascinating to listen to, and who I really enjoy listening to. So I can't. If I say a few names, then other than those of the anonymous benefactor we also got from, people will be upset that I didn't mention them. So I'll just leave it at that.
No good can come of it.
So anybody here that has not asked a question yet, can I say in a second, Trent? Okay, go ahead, Trent.
Andreas, listen, I just want to say something to you here. I don't know, I mean, I'm sure you're aware of this, but by default, you are the face of what we're doing here, right? And, there's a little bit of pressure put on your shoulders because we all expect great things out of you, and you continue to deliver. You brought a lot of us into Bitcoin, and I think you continue to reaffirm to those of us that are coming in after the fact. We appreciate what you're doing. We appreciate how you're representing us. I don't want to have the last word tonight, but I just want to say, keep on keeping on, man. If this was an election in your country, you're the president.
It's true.
You're our guy.
You're our CEO, bro.
Yeah, we've elected you the CEO of Bitcoin. Yeah, how do you feel?
Yeah. I am humbled and also hoping that, unlike the previous CEO of Bitcoin, I'm not arrested.
Oh, very good. Anybody else have a question? Raj, go ahead.
Hi, Andreas. My name's Neeraj. what are your thoughts on using the blockchain as a database of sorts? There have been some companies out there that have started doing things like, I believe there's like an extension to the reference Bitcoin daemon where you can add arbitrary data, but there have also been companies that have been actually having some sort of services where you can write messages into the blockchain. What are your thoughts about scalability, I guess, responsibility, and the viability of that sort of thing in the future?
That's a great question. It's technical, it's political, it's financial, it's all kinds of good things, and most importantly, it's enormously controversial. This is a topic that has been argued now for 2 years, probably more than that even. There's this ongoing argument about putting data in the blockchain, and I don't want to paraphrase and misrepresent, but I'm going to try my best to make a fair representation of the two arguments. One of the arguments goes like this: those who have allocated nodes, Bitcoin nodes, have done so in the form of, if you like, a contract or a social compact, or based on certain expectations, and the expectations will be that they will enable financial transactions of a currency. They did not sign up to store your data, and therefore a use of the blockchain that involves storing data violates the expectations, the social compact of the people who are running nodes, because it eats up data on their disk space and it eats up bandwidth on their network for stuff that they didn't sign up to store, forward, or process. So that's one argument. There's another argument that says you pay the fee, you put the data in. If it costs more to store something than people are willing to store, then they should raise the price for storing that data. And if someone is willing to pay the price, the transaction fee, then there's no such thing as good data or bad data. There's no such thing as a real transaction or a dust transaction. There's no such thing as spam on the blockchain versus data on the blockchain. There's only transactions that were paid and verified, and transactions that were not paid and verified. And if it's paid and verified, it's good data, and you should store it. So those are two competing arguments.
Which one's right?
That one.
So, I don't know which one's right, because they're really a matter of principle and philosophy. I think probably
Do it. Say it.
probably the best result was the one that Gavin Andreessen decided on, and I have to say, Gavin is our Linus Torvalds, and one of the things I really, really like about Gavin, everybody in Bitcoin has their hero worship and their horrible detractors and trolls, but my perspective on Gavin is that he is immensely pragmatic. He doesn't play ideological or political games. He believes that for everything there's a neutral engineering and sensible solution, and in a very calm way he will argue his point and go for the sensible solution, and in many cases that's a really good outcome. So his approach to this was that since people were going to try to stuff data into the blockchain anyway, and most of the time they did this by introducing so-called unspendable transactions, but not provably unspendable. They would basically create bogus destination addresses that did not have private keys corresponding to them, that in fact were bogus destination addresses because they represented the hash of a document or a piece of metadata or something that someone wanted to stick into the blockchain, and because that was the only way to get it in, they'd create a bogus transaction to put it in. This had two effects. One, it put the data in the blockchain, but it also meant that people had to carry around this transaction forever just in case someone spent it, even though it cannot be spent because there is no private key. So it was the worst of both worlds. So Gavin suggested a solution which was introduced in, I believe, 2009 version of the client almost a year ago now called OP Return, which is a script operand that allows you to add, initially was planned for 80 bytes, but then it got squeezed down to 40 bytes of data into the blockchain. The advantage of this is that if you have an OP return in a transaction, that data is provably unspendable. It means that you don't have to carry it around in the memory pool and expect that someone might spend it in the future. When we have a provable blockchain, sorry, a prunable blockchain solution, which is on the cards for development, then nodes that don't want to be full archival nodes, but pruning nodes, will prune all of these transactions and drop them from the blockchain. So you get the best of both worlds. I think the idea of storing unlimited data in the blockchain is probably not going to scale very well. I like a hybrid approach where you have distributed databases of actual data that are stored in and transmitted using things like BitTorrent, right? And then what you do is you have the hashes of that data potentially time-stamped and securely recorded in the blockchain. The whole advantage of the blockchain is that it provides a secure time-stamped data storage mechanism with global consensus. And so if you can take a piece of data, say a giant multi-gigabyte file, the latest WikiLeaks, to pick a subject to my liking, and you want to prove that that was released on a specific date, and you want people to be able to find it on the internet. You take its hash, you publish its hash in the blockchain and timestamp it using an OP return. It only takes up 40 bytes, 32 in fact. And then you can use that hash in a protocol like BitTorrent to fingerprint the file and discover it on the network, create a magnet link as it's known, and then go download the actual multi-gigabyte file off blockchain. So you can have a hybrid solution. The metadata and the hashes are stored in the blockchain, which provides secure storage in a way that can be pruned by nodes that don't want to hold it. And if you pay the transaction, it goes in the blockchain. That's a rather long-winded technical answer to describe. It's a really controversial subject, but very interesting. To me, this is one of the most interesting applications of the blockchain. If you don't allow non-transactional data to be encoded in the Bitcoin blockchain, then you basically cede the entire Bitcoin 2.0 smart contract and application space to other blockchains. And I think that's a mistake because the security and economic activity and currency weight of Bitcoin makes it an ideal platform for smart contracts. So it would be a shame to lose that just because of an ideological position. Anyway, I care about this topic. I think it's a very interesting one. As I said, I'm a geek.
That's cool, man. Do we have anybody else that has not asked a question yet that wants to ask a question? We don't have too much more time here. I want Andreas to have a good night, and so
I've got 20 minutes to midnight. I'm on the East Coast this time.
The 22nd of next year, I think there's an event here called CoinFest.
Are you coming to CoinFest?
Listen, if you're not doing anything, I'm pretty sure.
What is the date?
It's February 20th to 22nd.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not conferenced out, you should fly to Vancouver.
It's in 11 cities around the world at once. It's a decentralized crypto convention.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Just be prepared. Like if you're coming to Canada, you're gonna drink. You drink like us. You're gonna hang out. You hang out like us, right?
Well, I have to admit, embarrassingly, I have been to Montreal, Toronto several times, and most recently Ottawa. And I have never been to Vancouver, so it's on my list, and I would very much like to come visit one of these days.
You're totally coming. You are totally
You've yet to
coming.
see Canada.
This is a gorgeous city. You're gonna love it. It's not officially the spiritual home of Bitcoin, but we had the first ATM here. It blew up here. You're gonna love this town. We're gonna treat you like a king. I got two people here that are fighting over the question. Andreas, you can pick the man in black or the lady in white.
You could. We can take some more questions as long as you have the time. I have the time. It's not a problem.
Awesome.
So we'll do the lady in white first.
Okay, what do you think has to happen to move Bitcoin away from being accessible to primarily technically minded groups and individuals to make it usable, secure, and understandable by a larger audience.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you there. You cut out during the first part of your question. Let me just adjust. Can you repeat?
Why do you think needs to happen to move Bitcoin away from being mostly accessible to primarily technically minded individuals and groups and make it usable, accessible, and secure and understandable by a larger audience?
Like mainstream it, basically.
Time. That's the only thing that's needed. I mean, there's no shortage of innovation. There's no shortage of companies working on exactly that problem. Keep in mind that, you know, I think I've said this before, but the idea being that for every problem in Bitcoin, if you're someone who has an entrepreneurial mind, what you see is not a problem. What you see is a potential solution, or you seek a solution, and you see a potential multi-million-dollar company or potentially multi-billion-dollar company. I mentioned this during the Senate hearings. Back in the mid-90s, people kept saying that the internet would fail because no one could find anything on the internet and search was impossible. And two guys created Google to solve that problem. And you know, now it's like, what, the fourth, fifth largest company in the world. Bitcoin is going to be an engine of economic activity, and I think a lot of the issues around mainstream adoption, user experience, interfaces, ease of use, ease of security, risk management, escrow capabilities, all of those things are going to be resolved. Now keep in mind that when you see adoption of a technology like this, it involves both sides moving. The techies are going to make it easier to use. But at the same time, what's going to happen, and this is interesting, is if this is useful enough to people, gradually society starts changing to adapt to new modalities and paradigms. I was watching on the Today Show in the 90s, there was, this was Morning in America, or the Today Show, and they were talking in 1994 about the internet and doing one of those little morning chat shows. And the anchors were having this hilarious, in retrospect, discussion. And so, is the internet the one with the @ sign? Is that the internet? No, that's email. And what's the www? Is that the internet? No, that's the web. So is it the dots that's the internet? Yeah, and this whole rambling conversation, and they can't quite wrap their heads around where does the internet start and email end, which part is email, which part is the web. It's all a foreign language, and the whole idea of blah 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 dot blah 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 .com /http : blah blah was a foreign language. And you know, part of it was making it easier so that you can use it on an iPad now, but part of it was society understanding these terms, and understanding the @ sign and understanding email. So I think you're going to see Bitcoin becoming more mainstream, and all it's going to take is time, because people need it, it's useful, and it's going to gradually get easier and easier. We're just pioneers here, we're early adopters like in any technology, and eventually I still have hope that one day, in the not so distant future, perhaps a decade from now, my mother will use Bitcoin. It took her 20 years to send her first email. From the day I sent my first email to the day she sent her first email was almost exactly 20 years. And so one day, I hope that will happen.
Sweet.
Have you ever heard of the Decentralized Dance Party? I know you're into decentralization, but do you know of them?
Decentralized Dance Party. No, I have not, but given the right kind of music, I'm game.
No, they just for the record, they started here. They've done parties in about 50 cities. They put a boombox in a backpack with a transmitter, and they transmit to all the people, and they just travel the city in a decentralized party.
There's
Fantastic. Love it.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
They want to do it everywhere around the world at the same time and do like a decentralized party.
When you come to Vancouver, we'll hope there is one, and we can travel the city. Okay, here we'll get into fun stuff. What's Bitcoin's biggest weakness? And if you had to kill Bitcoin, how would you do it?
Oh, okay. It sounds like party questions that you've planned in advance.
Couple of them.
Yeah. Bitcoin's biggest weakness, Let's see. I'm not quite sure. I think it's going to be difficult to see which one. Bitcoin's biggest weakness is going to be obvious in retrospect once it fails, but I don't. If I knew it, I'd be working to fix it. Bitcoin has a lot of quirky things to it, from centralization of miners to the way the block reward is distributed in a winner-take-all fashion. The really early distribution of a lot of coins that made it early adopter heavy. There's a lot of little quirks. I think some of the user experience and user interface are really kludgy and difficult to understand for mainstream people. But I think all of those are surmountable. I don't think there are any weaknesses that are not fixable within Bitcoin. And how would I take Bitcoin down?
Drone strikes on core devs.
Yes. So what I would no, we just fork it and continue. Quite honestly, if we stopped development of Bitcoin today and we were stuck at 0.92 or 0.94 or whatever the current version is forever, it would still work and it would continue to. We wouldn't need to do anything to it, and that's assuming that nobody else ever figured out how to program another line of it, which I can assure you a lot of people would very quickly. There is no central point of failure in Bitcoin. So what I would do, this is my recipe for taking down Bitcoin. First, I would ignore it. Then I'd probably laugh at it. Then I'd fight it. And I'd lose.
Well done, man. Well done.
Okay, you're one of the few people that's actually like into the concept of altcoins. Most Bitcoin like speakers and like prominent people are like, oh, all altcoins are useless. But you're like one of the few that's actually like, promotes the fact that they exist. So of the current generation of altcoins, do you think anything will actually like last in a meaningful way, or is this all just like experimentation and innovation and like pump and dump?
Yes. Several of the current generation of altcoins will continue to exist. In fact, recently, I saw someone who was running CPM off a floppy disk. I kid you not. In 2014. Was running the CPM operating system off a floppy disk, and that proves one of the most important rules of technology, which is that technology is a bit like cats. They don't quite die, they just kind of go away into a corner and hide there. Technology, and I love cats, by the way, but I have 3. But technology never dies. It's almost immortal. There are pockets of the internet where someone is running a Commodore 64 with a hacked together TCP/IP stack off a 2400 baud modem. I still have a 2400 baud modem. Technology never goes away. There are floppy disk master boot record viruses still circulating on the internet, and therefore. Somewhere, someone will still be running a Dogecoin node in 2042, and it might be the most popular currency in the world, or that might be the only person running it, but none of this will ever go away, I don't think. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting.
Okay,
wait, I just want to say, Andreas, you've got a very good signal for 2400 baud happening right now.
Yeah, this is a gig internet connection, which I'm very happy with.
That's freaking hot. Alex.
I pay a lot for my internet, but I think it's a worthy investment. It's one of the things I splurge on, and that's wherever I go, I get fiber and gig.
Oof, that's hot.
Okay, I put my tinfoil hat on. Okay, without naming names, have you ever been asked to privately consult for about Bitcoin by any existing legacy financial companies or banks?
Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely. Not only have I been asked, but I have consulted for a number of, and I can't name because I'm under non-disclosure, but in fact, I've spoken at conferences held by big banks. I've spoken in executive boardrooms. Pretty much what you saw at the Senate conversation I had at a boardroom level of a bank a few months ago. Listen. Most bankers are publicly not interested and privately fascinated by Bitcoin and want to learn as much as they can about it. The smart ones among them are not threatened. They see an interesting tool that they can use to take out intermediaries like DTCC or SWIFT and organize better networks. Foreign banks especially are interested in, developing world banks are interested in using Bitcoin or similar technology to massively expand their reach, to reach SMS-only customers in rural places that they don't have infrastructure. Yes, I do go and talk to banks about Bitcoin, and I also charge them double what I charge any other business to do that. And then I use that money to subsidize my travel to talk to meetups for free and go to conferences in the developing world for free.
So it sounds like you're working for the banks now.
Well, my primary message is really, really simple. And this is the message I honestly deliver to the banks, which is there are two ways you can go about this. You can try to fight, resist, deny, disclaim, disrupt Bitcoin, and in 10 years it will fundamentally disrupt your business, and things will be upside down from your perspective. Or you can try to co-opt, embrace, use Bitcoin, and in 10 years it will fundamentally disrupt your business and things will be upside down from where you are today. Your choice. In this game, there's a new player on the block. It's a very massively disruptive technology. It's a technology that works, and it's a technology that delivers a service far more efficiently and for lower cost and more securely than you can. And so at this point, you need to decide whether you're going to be Kodak, Blockbuster, Tower Records, or whether you're going to be Netflix, Apple, or Samsung.
Interesting. Changing topic quickly, who invited you up to the Senate hearing? How did you get roped into that? And it's very interesting sort of scenario.
Oh, the clerk of the Senate invited me.
Very nice.
So it was directly by the Senate committee. They invited me. Yeah, I got an email one day. I have a website, and on my website I have some forms for doing, conference invitations, and you can fill in a form and send me a. It's mostly to keep things a bit organized on my end, and as you can see, my staff is here behind me. Imaginary. So just handling all of the requests is a bit of a nightmare. So I have a form, and somebody from the Senate went to my website and filled in a form and invited me to go speak.
Very cool.
And I actually put out a question on Twitter, and I said, should I go speak to the Canadian Senate? And the response was overwhelmingly positive. So I decided to do it.
Sweet.
Why is Bitcoin just like the best thing ever?
That's it right there. That's perfect. It's a perfect answer.
These are like party questions. Bitcoin is not the best thing ever. And if I did think Bitcoin was the best thing ever, I would be a bit too much of a geek even for my own geeky appreciation. I would rank several things above Bitcoin, and including people in many cases, but also cats and cat videos. But Bitcoin is up there, definitely in the top 5.
Yeah.
You have I've listened to you talk with Chris Ellis kind of philosophically about currency in general. Yeah. And I'm really fascinated by that, how you kind of talk about it like language. And I was wondering if there was ideal currency, like do you have ideal currency in your head of what that would look like? or is that something that's like too kind of vague and like?
That's a great question, actually. Thank you so much for listening to that particular podcast. I really enjoyed talking with Chris Ellis, and in fact, we have to do that again. Is there an ideal currency? Well, to make the same comparison, I believe currency is language. It's a language for expressing value, and currency emerges as an artifact of human civilization and of human culture. Currency emerges in different scenarios. If you haven't heard me talking about this, I often talk about the fact that currency is one of the oldest inventions in the world. It's existed for hundreds of thousands of years. It's probably older than the wheel, and perhaps the first wheel was bought for currency, beads, feathers, something like that, who knows. But currency is a cultural artifact, and if you see it as that, then the question, is there a perfect currency, is, let me go on a limb here and say, is equivalent to saying, is there a perfect human language? And despite what advocates of Esperanto might say, I think the truth is that human language is by its very nature contextual and localized and evolving and amorphous and fractal in nature and subject to evolutionary pressure by society and by generations of humans who are under evolutionary pressure. So I think there is no more a ideal currency than there is an ideal language, because the simple truth is that currency is ideal within a context, and that context is forever local and forever changing and forever mutating. And so a language that is perfect for this moment is not perfect for the next, and a language that is perfect for this space is not perfect for another space. And the same thing applies to currency, which means there won't be one currency to rule them all. There'll be 100,000 currencies to pick from.
All right. I think we have one more question for you, Andreas, from our good friend Alex.
Okay. We asked this to everybody, so I'm sorry for all the silly ones, but we have to finish on this.
One more party question.
Because we have a bet going on.
Okay.
What was the Bitcoin price at midnight on December 31st?
This coming?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't do very well at predicting the Bitcoin price.
Pick up a number, so I can bet on it. Peter Todd said 0, so you can't pick that one.
December 31st this year.
Yeah.
December 31st, yeah.
Let's say 250.
Okay. It's good.
That's a good number. As good as any.
2,000 Canadian.
Yeah.
All right, so
Awesome,
I think we're pretty good there, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so
seriously,
much.
man.
It was very cool you spent time with us tonight.
Okay, hold on. I gotta say now, I have fallen asleep listening to you talk more times than I care to admit. I swear to God.
What he means before he's going to bed.
No, that's what I thought.
I'll take that as a compliment. And I thank you so much for inviting me. I know my schedule has been absolutely insane, and several people from this group tried several times, and I wasn't always as responsive. But thank you for trying again and inviting me. I really enjoyed this, and I look forward to doing it again. Again, thank you so much.
We'll see you in February, Andreas.
I'll try and make it at the next conference. Good night, everyone.
I want to see you in February.
In February. All right.
Thank you so much.
That was
awesome, bro.
Oh yeah, right. It's not broadcast fun.